Welcome to the Living After Faith podcast, a podcast designed to help you as you leave religion and move forward with your life. We are the official podcast of RecoveringReligionists.com, a recovery group founded by Dr. Daryl Ray, the author of The God Virus. We welcome your feedback. You can contact us by going to livingafterfaith.com and facebook.com/livingafterfaith and follow us on Twitter at LAFwithme. And now, here's today's program on Living After Faith with Rich and Deanna Joy Lyons.
I'm Deanna Joy Lyons.
And I'm Rich Lyons.
Come laugh with me.
Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're talking to Seattle Atheists live in Seattle. Hello, everyone.
I'm so happy to see you guys here. I was so nervous nobody was going to show up. Thank you so much for coming. This is wonderful. So normally we edit our podcasts. We record them in our closet, sometimes not fully clothed, as I'm sure you're aware. And so today it's really nice to be wearing clothes in a nice cool room and recording in such comfort.
And today what we're going to do, we haven't really, in the podcast we've talked bits and pieces about both of our stories, but we never really put the whole story together in one piece, because what we generally do is tell a little piece and then talk about the recovery from that piece and how we've focused on that. So today we're going to tell both of our stories in more of a complete form and then kind of sum it up all at the end. And we're going to have time for questions if you have questions. So let's just get started. As Jerry mentioned, I started, actually I was born and raised Episcopalian, which is a pretty benign Christian faith. And by the time I was 18 years old, I realized it was so benign it was actually lame and useless. So once I got 18, old enough to tell my parents what to do, right? I stopped going to church and really just kind of gave up on that. But a few years later, I had a business I was running, basically buying and selling gold, and the bottom just fell out of the gold market, and I lost everything. And at that point, that's when my first wife decided, you know what, yeah, me too, bye. When the money was there, you know. So that young, you know, I just felt like life just kind of ended. Of course, when you're 22 years old, you know, I know now you've got plenty of time to restart and do something else. But back then, you didn't really see that. So I kind of jump-started my life, and I met this girl that I was back working in radio again, and met this girl that was the county judge's secretary, and made a bet with the judge. I said, you know, she's kind of hot. And he said, yeah, but you'll never touch that. I'm like, why is that? He said, she's Pentecostal. I don't know what that means. So I said, yeah, you want to make a bet? And he's like, yeah. So we made a $100 bet. I asked her out, and she said yes. So, and back then, I never collected on the bet, which I really regret. But, so yeah, she goes out with me, and we date a few times, and I find out something about Pentecostals. They don't go to movies. They don't watch TV. They don't dance. They don't drink. You can just start just about any sentence with "they don't" and put whatever you want to, and it works. They don't. So eventually, I finally said, well, what do you do? She says, we go to church. So eventually, I went to church with her, and what I didn't realize is I was absolutely perfectly set up to get locked into what I will now call a cult, and you can do a Google search on it. I'm not alone saying that. Search UPCI and the word cult, and you'll come up with tens of thousands of hits. So I'm not the only one out there saying that that particular church is a cult. Unlike what most people say, why did you join a cult? Well, nobody joins a cult. You join a group of people who love you. You join a group of people that, for some reason, just think you're the most awesome person in the planet, because that's the way their system works. The way their system works is they prey on people who are broken. I just come through a divorce. I just lost my business. I was back in radio making less money in a year than I had been making in a week. I mean, everything had kind of cratered in life, and that's the one that they want to get. So I became a victim, and when you hear this phrase, you'll think, oh my God, really? I became a victim of missionary dating, where someone dates someone who's lost for the purpose of bringing them into the church.
Yeah, I'd never heard this phrase before, but I was like, it's not possible. I'm from Seattle. People don't do that.
People do.
People don't date into cults. That's crazy.
It's what happened to me. So anyway, I start dating her, and I found out real quickly that unless you do certain things in their church, you're not in their church. You know, first thing I had to do is shave my facial hair because nobody in their church has facial hair. Next thing I had to do was quit wearing short sleeve shirts because you're not allowed to wear short sleeve shirts. Someone may think your elbows are a little too sexy there, bro.
Ooh,
I'm just don't want to make you feel uncomfortable. I'm just. Do you show those often? I'm sorry. Don't mean to pick on you, but the bottom line, if my elbows turn someone on, that's either flattering or they have a problem. It doesn't really reflect on me, you know? But I began to change things, but what I really found out is to be in this church, you had to speak in tongues. That was the defining line of whether or not you were Pentecostal or not. And the process of speaking in tongues is where you get your mind and everything so whipped up in a frenzy to where you're just babbling incoherently. And there's really more psychology to it than that. But that's the process. So some people, it just happens because their mind knows that's what they're supposed to do and they do it. Others of us are a little slow because it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So it took about a year for that process to happen. In that year, 8 times I asked this woman to marry me, and every time she said no. And it's so funny because then I all of a sudden received the baptism of the Spirit, spoke in tongues. I noticed everybody was planning a wedding. I didn't ask anybody to marry me or anything. They're planning a wedding, and I figured out when I got measured, I'm getting measured for the white tux, so I guess that meant I was the guy. So, but that was the process of bringing me into the church. Deanna has a different story of how she became involved in church, so go ahead.
I was always kind of a natural-born skeptic. My dad had a lot of Carl Sagan and Isaac Asimov and stuff around the house. Books galore. I was always a big sci-fi nerd, and those of you who are in the same boat, you know there's not a lot of religion in sci-fi. And my mom used to drag us to this United Methodist church, which looking back, I realize it's not quite as milquetoast as I thought. It's like very mild, very bland, but pretty much your standard Christian church. And I still don't know what it is that separates Methodists from the rest of Christians. I don't really know. They used to go, oh, you can come to our church, you could be homeless, wearing rags, dirty and filthy and stinking. And
That's what they say.
That's what they say, exactly. But, that wasn't really the case out in Redmond there. But I remember sitting in Bible school, and they were talking about, the story of Noah's Ark. And I started thinking to myself, that's a big problem. How are you going to fit all those animals on this boat? And, we didn't have any sophisticated apologetics. And I think a lot of people probably were in the same boat with me. They didn't think really heavily about what was going on. There wasn't any arguing because everybody just kind of agreed with all that. But I would sit there and I go, why are we here? I mean, there's not really a God anyways.
Wrong.
Ooh, okay, no lightning. Phew. But I was thinking to myself, it doesn't make sense. And I'm really not happy about the whole Adam and Eve story. It's kind of a feminist, I guess, even at the tender age of about 9. I was like, how come it's all the girls' fault? Like, we get enough crap as it is, right? So finally, after a lot of kicking and screaming and arguing and not getting dressed on Sunday morning, my mom gave up on trying to make me go to church. I think I was probably about 13 or so. We had some family issues, a lot of dysfunction in our family. So later on, I ended up running away from home, and I got put into a foster home in Redmond, very close to that same Methodist church, actually, we used to go to. And these people, when I moved in there, the social worker said, well, they're, real nice Christian family. They're very kind and very sweet, and you'll love them. You'll just get along, no problem. And I was like, you're not going to make me go to church, are you? And she said, they're fine. They won't make you go to church. I mean, you can just do whatever you want. They're not going to push their faith on you. 2 days later, I was being screamed at for not going to church. I was being forced into it, so okay, fine. I go, and it was a church, it turns out, is a lot like the same Pentecostal thing that Rich was in. They were called Lighthouse, which is...
part of the Vineyard movement, if you're familiar with the Vineyard.
Yeah, the Vineyard, not Lighthouse. That was your church.
Yes.
Yes. And the Vineyard, it's like the McDonald's of Pentecostal churches. You know, they have kind of they have a music ministry. They like send out CDs. They sell them to all the other churches. They have very similar, like, new agey, charismatic, that kind of thing. And these people would like sing with their hands up in the air. They'd be like, oh, they look like they were so into it. And I was like, what are these people feeling? Because I'm not getting it. I don't know what it is they're doing. And then we're in youth group. And in youth group, the lady that was leading it, she was probably 20 years old. She's talking about, you know, we're taking a church ski trip recently, and I was broke and I needed to go on this ski trip. And I prayed. I said, God, I just need $20 to go on this ski trip. And the whole time I'm thinking, aren't there better things to be asking? You know, if he's the all-powerful dude up in the sky, can do anything. I would ask for him to feed Africa. I think that would be a good start. Not $20 for a ski trip. So anyways, that was pretty cementing in my disbelief. When I got to see these people and their overwhelming devotion to things that just didn't make sense, that kind of cemented it. It was many years before I finally called myself an atheist, and it was from hanging out with the Seattle Skeptics, which I know several of you attend as well. And I said, you know what, I don't believe in Bigfoot, I don't believe in God either. I'm an atheist.
Once I got into the church, it was easy for me to rise up a little bit. Within weeks, I was youth pastor, and then within months, I was associate pastor. I was preaching just about every week, and the reason for that is I was a radio professional. I have a little bit of training in speaking. I do it fairly well. And in the Pentecostal ranks, by far and large, since they treat education as though it's an evil thing, you're dealing with a lot of uneducated people, a lot of people that think, you know, once you can read and write, that's really all you need to do. And there's no, they keep the people so limited in what they know. You can't watch television, you can't listen to secular radio, you're not supposed to read newspapers, you're not supposed to read anything that's not written by Christian authors. You know, they've got this real strict regulation on what comes into your mind. So even though I was young, I was raised in a different environment in that and had been exposed to a whole lot more than that. And because of that, and being in journalism, I mean, you have to read and write and do a little bit of the basic functions. I was in a position that it was very easy for me to ascend up the ranks a little bit, especially in a local church. So in the local church, I began teaching and preaching, and I adopted an attitude early because I was preaching really before I had any kind of solid footing into what I was preaching. But what I took the standpoint of is that the Bible is always right. Nothing wrong with that. It can't be. It's inerrant. It's perfect. And number two, our doctrines are perfect because men better than me worked these out. So I just assumed my job as a preacher was to do the best job I could making the doctrines in the Bible all line up so people could understand one from the other and vice versa. So I got very good at creating different explanations for things, and that got me a little bit of attention as a speaker, and people wanted to have me come to their place and speak. For example, how do you get around evolution and tie it in with creation? You know, it's a difficult thing because, you know, they're young earthers, so the earth is 7,000 years old. So how do you what's your answer for that? Well, someone from the outside looking in can think just a little bit and come up with a simple answer like I did. What I said is, when God created Adam, what did he create? Everybody who knows the story answer. When God created Adam, what did he create? Exactly, a man. Notice nobody said a baby. He created a man, and the Bible tells us that. So when he created a man, you could bring all the scientists in the world and look at that guy and say, how old is this guy? And let's take Kyle here as an example. Kyle, we're going to rename you Adam. Everybody, we're cool with that? Stand up. Turn around, let everybody see you. How old would you say Kyle is? Oh, excuse me, How old would you say Adam is? What did we say? 14. Come on, how old would we say Adam is? 30. That's perfect. That's exactly right. But you see, if he was really Adam, we could say, no, God just created him moments ago. He's not really 30 years old. But by all appearance, he looks 30 years old. He has, everything a 30-year-old man would have. The same way when God created a universe. Yeah, he's got fuzz on his face and probably other places we don't want to talk about. And so you create this guy with age on him already. He created a man from scratch, and 30 seconds ago he didn't exist, and now he's 30 years old. How did that happen? Well, he's God. He can do that. So what about the universe? Same answer. How did you create the universe? He created it just like he created a mature man. He created a mature universe. Well, all the tests show that the dinosaurs and things were millions and millions of years old. Well, sure, he created them millions and millions of years old.
When I first heard this argument from Rich, I said, this is a slippery mofo. You can see how he got into the ministry, because he can just, pow, like that, come up with an answer that actually makes sense. It was pretty hard to refute. And everybody can still believe exactly what they want to, that the earth is 6,000 years old, that the universe was created 6,000 years ago.
And the beautiful thing about it, it negates anything you can say scientifically. It kind of, it's in that vacuum. That was the way my mind thinks. So it wasn't hard for me to move up. And the first 10 years of my pastorate as an associate pastor, I was under the single most abusive man I've ever met in my life. And that was my mentor, and he established a lot of things. Number one, the minister is always right no matter what anyone else says. And those other people are simply minions that are put there to give the minister his ability to minister, or to their, kind of like pawns in that chess game we played. And Kyle was very nice and spared my pawns and killed all the other people. He totally didn't get the game, but even though he won. But the whole purpose of this guy's ministry was to lift himself up and make himself something. And he's out of prison now, but served time in prison. He served time in prison for an insurance fraud. This just shows you the degree of arrogance that the guy had. He was in Baytown, Texas, running a church thrift store type thing, where he was pastoring a work and using the thrift store to fund the outreach, and the outreach to fund the thrift store, and all of this kind of thing. And one day decided he needed some money. So he goes out and buys a $1 million insurance policy on his thrift store and the contents thereof and everything. On the next day, it burns to the ground. The next day, 24 hours.
The insurance company wasn't suspicious, were they?
Well, the police began to look into it. And of course, the night that the big flames roared, you got this pastor in front crying tears, how horrible it is, and the people who are really going to hurt are the hungry of the community, and we're going to survive, but what are they going to do? So people respond and pour tons of money into this guy to help him out and to feed the poor and to continue this thing. And the police check out the surveillance tape, and they notice moments before the fire started, he walks up with a broom handle and moves one of the cameras so it can't see the door. Moments later, the last shot on it is him sitting at the computer telling it to turn off. And he turns off the system. 15 minutes after that is when the fire started. And for some reason, he really didn't think he would get caught, because you see, he's the man of God. God's got his back. He doesn't have to plan all of this stuff out. So he got to spend a few years in federal prison. I understand he's preaching again in Baytown. So, but that's just the attitude of arrogance that this church had. His favorite line to people when they were about to leave church is, the last person who left here wound up in a body bag.
Well, eventually we all do, right?
I guess. I never knew who that person was, and I'd been at the church longer than he was. So I don't know who wound up in a body bag. But that church was such an abusive place. Abuse was the natural tone of that church. And the thing is, I've been doing a little bit of going back into my history to try to remember some of these things because they get washed away. That's the nature of the Bible itself. The Bible creates a hierarchy that allows for abuse without retribution. It's funny, you know, pedophilia, anybody think that's a good thing? You know that there is no biblical prohibition at all to pedophilia?
That explains a lot.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, two consenting adult males or two consenting adult females can't have time together, but you and your 4-year-old buddy. Isn't that terrible? But that's the way it's set up. So in this process, that pastor moved on and I became the senior pastor of the church. And as the senior pastor of the church, I began to get faced with questions that went beyond the Bible's ability to answer them. Some people get healed when you pray. Some people just plain old die. I had that happen to me. There was one lady, she was sick. She was in Tyler, Texas in a hospital. I got a call. The pastor was off in Brazil, the senior pastor, the guy who went to prison. He's off in Brazil. He calls me up, says they called, asked me to pray. I obviously can't do it. You can go do it. So I drive to Tyler, go over there. She's in ICU. I walk in. I lay my hand on her and say my little prayer. She, you know, wakes up and lifts her hands up, starts praying. The nurses run me out of there. I didn't know she was in a coma. They thought she was going to die. And at that point, things turned around. She didn't die. You're supposed to applaud here. Thank you, because I was really into taking credit for that. About a year later, she got sick again. I drive over to Tyler, Texas. This time I'm the pastor, the senior pastor. I go in there and I lay hands on her, and while I am praying, she died, just plain old dead. Dead, died. Well, applause. You have to take credit for one side, you have to take credit for the other, right? That's kind of, yeah. What was the difference? Same guy prayed, same hospital, same person, same everything. Why did she die the second time and not die the first? Or yeah.
God works in mysterious ways?
You got it. There's got to be an answer. It was her faith that was lacking, not mine. But you see, there's always a cover for that. But I began to ask serious questions. I began to ask myself because I began to see holes in things. Then one day, I invited a choir to come sing at my church, and this choir was from Lufkin, Texas. I'm in Marshall, Texas. And they're from Lufkin, Texas Bible College, the mecca of Christian education in the state of Texas. If you're from the United Pentecostal Church, otherwise you've never heard of them. We used to refer to it as Texas Bridal College because all the future ministers went there and all the future ministers' wives went there. They just weren't ministers' wives yet, but it was kind of where, you know, the ministers go to find a wife that they can go into the field with. So any girl who could play a piano and sing, dude, that's totally minister's wife material right there. So they would get matched up. Anyway, they have their chorale and they're out singing. So I had them come to our church to entertain on a Friday, and not very many people came, fortunately. About 40 people came, and they went, and it was pretty much uneventful. It was on a Friday night. On the following Monday, I had chicken bone caught in my throat. Yeah. So I'm at the ER getting this chicken bone pulled out of my throat, and while I'm there, the doctor walks back in and says, "You said you're a Pentecostal pastor?" "Yeah." He said, "Who do you have in Karnak, Texas?" I said, "We don't have a church in Karnak, Texas." He said, "You don't have any Lighthouse Church in Karnak, Texas?" I said, "No, we have Lighthouse Church on Karnak Highway, and I'm the pastor of that." He says, "Oh." He walks off. He comes back with a cordless phone. Back in those days, those were pretty cool, you know. I mean, he hands it to me. It's the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. It turns out that one of the members of the chorale that came to see us in Dallas, they had picked up, they had just had a new baby, so mom flies in from Taiwan, and they picked her up at Dallas before coming to our church, and then after they came to our church, mom went to the hospital because she's snorting and sneezing and all kinds of stuff going on and coughing and wheezing and has a little bit of fever. At that particular time, there was this disease. It was ripping up some places like Toronto and Taiwan and a few other places called SARS. I don't even remember what it stands for anymore. sudden acquired respiratory syndrome. Something like
I
that.
think that's it. Very good.
So the Center for Disease Control call says, how many people were there? I said, 40. I said, well, if this is actually SARS, 8 of them are going to die. I'm like, that's not good. So then first thing I did is called all 40 people. They told me the routine you have to go through. You call the people, you notify them, here's the rules you have to go through. I did exactly as I was supposed to. Called everyone who was there, explained to them, if you have any of the following symptoms, call 911 immediately. What they will do is send someone to your house to take you in an ambulance to a place where they can get you very good medical care, and they're going to take care of you. And that way, it's very important that we do this, because if we don't do this, other people could get sick and thousands of people could die. So I told everyone that. Then I get a call from our corporate, if the church is called corporate, the hierarchy, how about that? Get a call from them and they say, you know, the way we want to deal with this is just tell them we're God's chosen. We don't have to worry with any of this stuff. We're not playing by any special rules. We're just going to stand strong.
Wait a second. You mean like God won't let you guys die of SARS?
Well,
because you're so special?
Pentecostals never die, right? Oh, wait.
Oh, that doesn't sound right.
They all die just like everybody else. It doesn't make sense. So I began to question, number one, their strategy. And I realized their strategy was based on a failure. They were basing what they were saying on the fact that they knew that we were going to fail, that things were going to happen and we were going to get blamed for it. And they were already couching themselves to where, you know, this is God's will for this to happen, and God has brought this to the, you know, they already had their plan set up. And I said, you know, I'm not going to handle it that way. So I called a news conference, which number one is bad, because Pentecostals, everybody knows, don't show up on TV because you're not even allowed to have one in your house. So I called a news conference, and right there in the middle of my church is, you know, ABC, NBC, CBS. This is back before they had more letters on them than they do now. And they had all these, you know, local TV stations and everyone. And I looked straight in the cameras, and here's what I said. Our people are committed to this community. We can't change whether or not we've been exposed to SARS. But what we can affect is whether or not you and your loved ones are exposed to SARS. What we're going to do, if anyone has any of these symptoms, we're going to do exactly what we've been asked to do. Because they've explained to us, unless you've had these symptoms for 24 hours or longer, you can't transmit the virus. So we are, at the first sign of symptoms, going to call 911. We can't change what's going to happen to us, but we can protect you. Turns out it wasn't SARS after all. Turns out it was just good old pollen in East Texas, and when she hit it, it turned up her immune system. But for 10 days, I'm living with this fear that 8 people in my church are going to die. For 10 days, I'm watching as corporate leadership, as the members of the church are scattering like cockroaches. And I keep telling them, number one, if we really believe God's going to protect us, why are we so scared? Number two, if heaven's as great as it's supposed to be, why are we so scared? Number three, if this is the will of God, why are we so scared and not just rejoicing that whatever's happening is what God wants to happen? Why is there such an intense panic, such a clinging to this life that we all think is stupid anyway, and we're all just preparing for the next life? I mean, this is the opportunity that we've all been looking for. And in all honesty, that's the way, if people really believed what we taught, that's what they should have accepted.
Cognitive dissonance, baby.
So I had questions. Once we realized what it was, we had a little ceremony, how God protected us from the evil SARS that really weren't here to begin with, and that was his will. Back to the cognitive dissonance. And I took a few weeks off and just left and had to think through some things. And I, for the first time, let myself actually use my brain and study what the things our church taught were. And was there really biblical evidence, biblical backing for those doctrines? And what I came away with was the United Pentecostal Church was a cult. That everything they taught was wrong. It was a perfect example of the fact that nobody in the place, and there are some now that are, but it was founded by people who had no education. It was started by people who got into a strange way of believing things, and it just began to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And as a result, they had this huge list of do's and don'ts and things, cans and can'ts and musts and can'ts and all of this kind of stuff.
Would you tell them about the DVD versus VCR controversy?
It's important. It gives you an example. Since you can't watch television, when videotapes, VCR tapes, betas and VHS, anybody remember those? When those came out, it was very easy to get the ministers to vote no, you can't watch those. So we couldn't watch those. But by the time DVDs came out, a lot of the ministers had kind of changed their position on things. The world was kind of changing a bit. By the time DVDs came out, a lot of the older ministers had died. A lot of younger ministers had come in. Every minister gets a vote. They realized they didn't have enough votes to ban DVDs. It was a sin to watch a movie at the movie theater. You can't go to the movie theater at all. Evil people go there. You can't go there at all. I don't know how that equates out, because evil people go to Walmart too. But, and they can go to Walmart. But evil people go to the theater. You can't go to the theater. So you can't watch, what's a movie? Back to the Future at the movie house. When it comes out on VHS, you can't watch it on VHS tape. But when it came out on DVD, thank the Lord, we can all plug in our DVD player and watch Back to the Future. Does that make any sense at all? Absolutely not. There was one minister I knew, you can't have televisions in your home. That's the way it's worded. No one can have a television set inside their home. He had a television mounted up against a window outside, like a window air conditioner unit with a box around it. Totally legit. That was okay. It was not inside the home. I mean, the ridiculous lengths people would go to sidestep stupidity. And when I began to look at this and realize how stupid so much of this stuff was, I began to take and do just the opposite of what I did before. I took the Bible and used that as reasons to show people how stupid this stuff really was. I started teaching that it's okay for women to cut their hair, because the Bible really doesn't ban it. And at this point, I was totally 100% Christian, 100% believer in God, but totally not believer in the church that I was a member of. So at this point, I began teaching all of these things, where they teach that it's a sin for women to wear makeup. That comes from the scriptures where Jezebel put on makeup. And, that's where people stop. But in that same sentence, it says Jezebel put on makeup. She also looked out a window, and there was a third thing that I can't remember that she did. I'm like, why aren't we preaching it's a sin to look out the window? In the same sentence where she put on makeup, she looked out a window. What makes one worse than the other? So I began to question those things. And many of the people in the church began to accept that. They began to look and say, he's right. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say what we were taught. My family was not in that group. At this point, in fact, my father-in-law was very, very sick. And I had this thing going. I was a faith healer. Any of y'all, if you're sick, just line up. Bring your checkbook. But, and that's a whole nother story. I guess I can get into that. But I was a bit of a faith healer. At this point, 7 people in a row that I had prayed for with cancer had been healed. That's pretty good, huh? Not too many cancer doctors can get.
What he doesn't mention is that was with the assistance of modern medicine.
Well, some with the assistance of modern medicine, and what I really don't mention is 7 of those people were not really diagnosed with cancer.
They just said, "Oh my God, Pastor Lyons, help me, I've got cancer."
Yeah, that kind of thing.
How do you know? I got a lump on my butt. Pray for me.
There was one lady that she had a lump in her breast. She had the manual exam, the mammogram, the ultrasound. Yeah, I'm thinking video. That's not video. The ultrasound. All of those looked bad.
DVD.
She was going to go back in for the DVD. The other thing, she was going to go back in and have a ultrasound-assisted biopsy where they were going to, find. And they go back in for the ultrasound-assisted biopsy, and nothing's there. And of course, I had prayed for her and told her she was healed, and boy, she goes in Monday morning and there's nothing there, and man, that counts as a healing. Guess what? That's not a diagnosis, number one. And sometimes things show up that go away. You know how I know that? Because when Deanna and I got married, she had a lump in her breast. She had the mammogram. She had the ultrasound. When they went in to do the ultrasound and the biopsy came back clean. She had an abscess, and it took some time to clear that away. Sometimes they clear themselves away. Sometimes you have to, go in there with a needle, and you just don't want to know. But that's what all they had to do for her.
If I'd have been Pentecostal, I would have said, Pastor Lyons healed me of cancer, because before I went in for that biopsy, I had breast cancer, and then he prayed for me and then made it better.
So you just can't lose in this faith healing thing unless they just die on you. I mean, a headache, it's eventually going to go away. A cold is going to get better. Flu, you get over it. Just about everything works that way until you die. And that's the bad thing, you see, because my father-in-law had cancer and he was just dying. And everybody in the family blamed Rich for that, because Rich and him never got along very well. And he was the secretary of the church, and they had arguments, and Rich is holding back God's healing. So,
what about God's mysterious ways? What about, his will?
Well, it was...
Now it's all your fault.
Yeah, my
Sorry,
fault.
dude.
Dead, Dead means dead, no matter what you believe. So he died. And after that, people in the family began to question me. They called me in. And number one, I'm now letting people sing on the platform women who've cut their hair, men who haven't. Men with facial hair, women without it. Oh, yeah. Women in jeans, because a woman can't wear anything but a dress or a skirt. Pants are a sin. A woman in jeans and makeup with cut hair is leading the singing, and you just can't let that happen in a church that believes the things we believe. So they called me in for a family meeting. This is great, loving Christian people. And they called me in for a family meeting, only they had this family meeting as though I'm not even there. They talk among themselves as though I'm invisible. Never felt so much like God in my life. But they began to have this conversation. And they began to talk about how Rich was leading us down the path of destruction. And if we can't turn Rich around, we have to destroy him. And at the time, I thought I was protected by God. I thought, well, we're just going to see who's really right here, aren't we? So, in the course of events that happened after that, the family set someone up to ask me to resign. Good Christian loving people, and I'm leading people to hell, obviously. So they call my presbyter and tell him what's up. Presbyter calls me and says, tonight one of your guys is going to ask you to resign because you no longer believe the tenets of faith. And what they mean by that, the tenets of faith or the articles of holiness, essentially means that the women can't cut their hair, can't wear pants, all of the stuff. It's so funny. All of them are against women. And the only thing about men is you got to wear long sleeves. And they just made that up because some dude was turned on by elbows. I mean, other than that, it never would have happened. I mean, it's so funny because you can tell where a preacher's, inner problems are by what he preaches against. The ones that preach against homosexuality. Anybody know what happens? The guy that preaches against women with open-toed shoes, guess what?
Ooh, toes.
There's, because from where you are, you think everybody thinks the way you do. So if toes turn you on, you think they turn everybody on. You're really telling more about yourself than you might really want to tell.
Anybody remember what Mark Driscoll said recently about masturbating while looking at yourself in the mirror?
If that turns you on, you're dead.
Yep.
He kind of gave a lot of information. I mean, that was a little too...
specific.
Yeah. I mean, you get specific on masturbating while watching yourself in the mirror, being turned on by your own genitalia.
That's gay.
Wonder who's thinking that.
Don't do that.
Not that there's anything wrong. I'm fine with that, but be who you are, So, as I began to get word that I was going to be ousted, whether I wanted to or not, and the thing is, there were only 2 families in the church. The rest of them were on my side. But at that point, I really realized I'd done all I could do. So that night, I walk up to the platform. Nobody says anything. Before anyone has a chance to speak, I say, I understand I've offended some people here. I also understand I've liberated some people here. But what I understand the most is that I've done all I can do here. So I resign. By the time I walked out, just straight off the platform, my wife's standing there. She said, "Did you resign?" Because I'd already told her I was. I said, "Yeah." She said, "I quit too. I'm done. I'm leaving." So 10 seconds maybe from the time I walked off the platform, I found out my marriage was cratered. And I was really trying to keep that from happening. Because at that point I wasn't still sure how things worked in the whole God thing. By the time I got to my office, which is maybe 25 feet from there, the phone's ringing. I grab it, it's the Presbyterian, and the first thing out of his mouth, "I thought you were a better man than that." "Than what?" Well, that sounded southern. "Than would." He said, "I understand that your church confronted you with an accusation that you've had a sexual relationship with a member of your church, and that rather than face the accusations, you resigned." Said, "I thought you were a better man than that." That never happened. No accusation was made. That's the kind of accusation when you're a preacher and you know that nobody's going to have an adulterous preacher in their pulpit. You fight that one. Even if you did it, you fight that one. Because that's your only chance. That's your only, that's where everything comes from. I didn't have a chance to fight that one. It's kind of funny because the girl that they accused it of, the next service, she wore a long stem Q-tip over her ear. Anyone who asked, she took it off and show them and say, "I'm giving you this so you can check and see if you can find my pastor's DNA." Because she knew. But anyway, so at that point, not only did they take my ministry, they took my career. Not only did they take my ministry in that church, take my family away, they took any possibility of me ever preaching again, was taken away by an accusation that I didn't have an opportunity to confront, an accusation that never happened. So at that point, I was kind of aimless. I thought I'd start a church. I thought I wouldn't start a church. I chose to be honorable and not start a church. And then later on, I did try to start a church. And the whole time, I'm going through this thing of not really knowing what I believe and trying to figure out what I really believe. And at the same time, realizing that life as I know it is changing, that it's not going to be the same. You can't go back, and there's nowhere left for me to go. I began to, so I actually finally began to question deeper things. And, I got to tell about Seizure Susie. I
Maybe
realized...
I should preface this for you just a little bit. After Rich got out of the ministry, he was no longer in the church. He was a hot pastor with no wife who hadn't been laid in a long time. And
you have to understand a little background.
He played that card hard.
It's what you do, right?
I don't blame him.
When you're used to playing whatever card you get. The marriage I was in, I haven't really mentioned that. The marriage I was in was bizarre to say the very least. The woman I was married to, I fully believe, had sexuality issues. And I'll leave it at that. The first 3 years we were married, we never had sex. It's true. We were married a total of 20 years, and in those 20 years, we only had sex 12 times. Yes, if it's been 3 years since you've had sex with that woman, you start counting them when you do. Once she got pregnant, it was done. She had to have a kid to verify her womanhood, and once that happened, it was over. There were issues there, and that caused an incredible amount of pain for me, if you can imagine that. I mean, sleeping next to the woman you love, but you can't touch. Being in a situation of, all the guys in here know there are desires that can just make you go freaking nuts. It's...
And gals.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, it's also a sin to masturbate. Let me remind you of that.
Wait, what? No.
Life gets rough, So anyway, that was the marriage I was coming out of. And I met a woman who I'd actually known in high school, and she'd been married to a preacher, and he up and died. It's kind of weird. Preachers do die, So she and I kind of were in this whole, recovery mode together. So we went to, she said, my daughter's performing in some kind of, I forget what it was she was performing in. And without Kevin, I just can't go. Can you, because she wants me to be out. Yeah, I'll go with you. So we go. Had a good time. Next night she says, this thing goes on for a couple of nights. Do you mind? I'm fine with that. Next night I show up to pick her up at her house. She says, come on down, eat dinner. I'm like, oh, well, no, it's okay. Sam won't notice we're not there. So I go in and we have dinner, and I'm like, we really need to be no, let's watch a movie. So she puts on Wedding Planner, takes off her shirt. It was on a DVD though, so it wasn't a sin. The Wedding Planner, not the shirt. About 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm laying there in bed with her, and she has a seizure. Grand mal seizure. Not grandma. Grand mal seizure. And I've got a friend who has epilepsy, so I know the rules. So I look at my handy-dandy Palm Trio. That gives you away where I am. It's the 850 or 650. Anyway, I'm looking at it and I'm timing, and I'm thinking, if she's still seized in 3 minutes, I have to make a decision. 3 minutes comes and goes. At 3 minutes, you need medical help. That's just, at that point, that's when you have to get help. So I look over at the phone, and I think, I can call 911, drop the phone, and run, and they'll find her. But that's pretty cheesy. So I pick up the phone, I call 911. My best friend, 911, what's your emergency? Hey, Ed, what's up? I mean, he knows me anyway, right? So I tell him what's going on, and he sends an ambulance. Yeah, I remember, I've been a news reporter in this community for 20 years. I mean, I'm born and raised there. Everybody knows me. So the ambulance drivers show up, and we're trying to get her all, and she doesn't have a stitch of clothes on, not a stitch of clothes. And they're, so they say, what medications does she take? I don't know. Does she have seizures regularly? I don't know. They said, well, go round up her medicines. I'm like, there's nothing in the medicine cabinet, So I'm wandering around the house. I find this windowsill with all these medicines, and I grab all of them. I'm trying to carry them all. And the guy says, why don't you put them in a Walmart bag? I said, I don't know where the Walmart bags are. I'm just here. And he said, you're like us. You're just here to help. I'm like, yeah, I'm just here to help. So I take we find her, and we get everything, and she goes, and I follow her to the emergency room, and I go in. I got to hurry up. I go into the emergency room, and, of course, I'm the president of the Chaplains Association, thank you. So I walk into the emergency room, and there's the lady, and she's like, phone number, please. So I give her my phone number, and she says, is that, and names my ex-wife's name. I said, oh, no. Is that name's my daughter's? No. You won't find her in my phone number at all. Says, oh, you know her phone number? So I'm looking through the nice little Palm Trio I've got, and yes, it is there. So I give her the number, and she says, is that Susie? I said, yes, that is Susie. She says, would you like us to put you down as a person of contact in case of emergency? I'm like, ooh. So we're all taken care of there. So I kind of walk around the corner, and I key in the code because I'm going to go back and see how she is. And I walk through, and about that time, the receptionist comes around this way and says, how'd you get through that door? So I'm Chaplain. She says, oh, hope your girlfriend's okay, Chaplain. So I get back there, and done, you finish.
Oh, that pretty much exposed you.
Pretty much, yeah. At that point, what happened, long story short, father-in-law, all the way I knew her son because I'd known her before. So I called her son and said, your mom's had a seizure. I followed her to the hospital. If you need to call someone, call someone. Whoever needs to know, and I don't know who that is. And he called me before I even got back to the hospital. He called me back and said, how'd you know? And I said, I was there. I was like,
At 3 in the morning.
At 3 in the morning.
You were there.
Anyway, father-in-law shows up. So the doctor asked me, he says, asked me all these questions. I don't know any answers. He says, what's your connection? Because the girl had just called me her boyfriend or her my girlfriend. That sticks in the brain. I said, I guess I'm her boyfriend. He says, guesses he's her boyfriend. A few minutes later, father-in-law comes in. And the doctor looks up and says, what's your connection to this? He says, I'm her father-in-law. He doesn't know husband's dead, right? So he's got father-in-law and thinks he's her boyfriend. So he goes out and gets security because it's about to hit, Well, anyway, long story short, father-in-law goes home and gets her clothes because Rich loaded her up in the ambulance without any clothes. And there so she needs someone to stay with her for the next 24 hours. I volunteer. Who else is going to do it, right? So because of Marshall, Texas being a small town, every hour on the hour, one of the deputies who also happened to go to the church that I used to pastor and happened to be part of the family that I used to be a part of, calls in a warrant check on my car at that location to verify that for the next 24 hours my car was there and didn't leave, which essentially proved what they wanted, that I was guilty of adultery, which was fine. At that point, I actually was. But at that point, I began
Only technically.
What?
Only technically
Well,
at that point, yeah.
But at that point, I began dealing with an issue called post-traumatic stress disorder, and began dealing with pain and things going on inside that you don't know where they come from. And one of the things Erica talked about is when people come out of church, they're looking for community. They're looking for a place that they can find a connection. Just because you can prove that evolution is the way that things happened and that there's no way that all of our DNA could have come from a single origin 7,000 years ago. Just because you can prove those things, even if someone's willing to say, yeah, I don't really believe all that stuff.
So when people end up where you were at that point, kind of blacklisted from the community, no career.
Yeah, I couldn't work in March. I had to leave.
Couldn't even be the chaplain anymore, which is, not directly tied to the Pentecostal faith.
Yeah.
How did you end up in Seattle? Because I think that's kind of interesting. You can short it if you want to, but I think it's a good connection to how you found and made community.
Interesting thing about coming to Seattle is, number one, don't know if you know this or not, but it's America's most unchurched city. And I figured I would come here and start a mega church. I never did that. But I got here, and as I began to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, when I was ostracized in Marshall, Texas, I couldn't get a job anywhere. No one would hire me. I was damaged goods. I couldn't go to church anywhere. I went to visit at a church, and the pastor calls me inside and says, I understand what you're trying to do, but we know kind of what went on here, and we really don't want that to be part of what goes on here. So, without saying anything, he said, leave. There's the door. Go. To explain how ostracized I was, my daughter is a certified sign language instructor. She is the bomb at that stuff. At this time, she was 13 years old. It was certifiable then, not that way. It was certifiable then, but you have to be 18 to get certified. So she was doing the sign language thing in this performance at the church. And it was pretty cool when they do that, and she invited me to go. I called the pastor and asked if I could go. He said, you can, but come late and leave early. I understand that. Doesn't want me mixing with folks. I'm tainted goods. So I showed up, and when I get there are two deputies, which we had several deputies in the church, but this time they're both in uniform. And when I show up, they walk me to a place that I'm allowed to sit, and one sits on either side. And when the service was almost over, they stand up and I'm going out. And that's the way they looked at how dangerous I was to them. It's a bit intimidating to me as well. So I find I'm going nuts. I'm at a place that I can't make anything in life work. I can't justify anything that's happening with what I believe. I can't make anything in life measure up with what the Bible says is supposed to happen. I began questioning the character of God and finally realized I'm going to go crazy. I had to leave. So I left Marshall, Texas, moved to Seattle based on a Match.com ad. Very, very intellectual decision.
Intellect? Which head?
So there I am in Seattle. That doesn't work out because I began finally reaching the place where I began questioning the character of God and began asking questions like this. You see someone who has an obvious physical defect, and you think, would an all-loving God make a situation where people are born with defects that make their life miserable? Does all loving in that situation come together at all? When you begin to ask the questions like, regardless of what branch of Christianity you believe, the majority of God's creation is going to be tormented forever and ever and ever, in flames and brimstone and a horrible place where there is no escape. And God created that place. And the Bible, even one place, says he enlarged it because he realized people were more wicked than he thought, which, if he's all-knowing, wouldn't he have known that to begin with? But all-knowing God, from the get-go, created life, knowing that the majority of what he created, he was going to torture forever and ever. Now, what kind of parent would I be if I tortured some of my children? Some of the time. Not all of them. Would I be a good parent? What kind of parent would I be if I tortured some of my kids all the time, but I was really good to some of the other ones? What kind of sicko would I have to be to even create that scenario to start with? And I began to think, if he made the rules, why did he have to make hell part of the plan? If he from the get-go had the ability and the wherewithal, and he could look at it and say, okay, when I create these two people, here's what all's going to happen. And by the end of time, 100 billion people, I get to torture them, have to torture them forever and ever and ever. What does that say about the character of God? Why would you even create? I mean, if that was the best you could do, if there couldn't be a way to create without eternal torture being part of your plan, wouldn't you just be better off to grow up here and not, that's a second statement, sorry. Wouldn't you be better off to just wait and grow up and not create at all? Rather than have to create people that you're going to torture forever and ever, eternally? I mean, does it make any sense at all that someone called all-loving, God is love, would even start this process going under the rules that he did? Made no sense at all. At that point, I realized I could no longer believe in that God. I mean, some things I can believe, but a God who's a bigger asshole than I am? I'm sorry, I couldn't buy that. I remember here in Seattle looking in the mirror, telling myself, you've done it now, Rich. You've come to the place that you're the worst a human can be. You're an atheist. It wasn't easy to get there. People thought I just got mad one day and said, forget it all. We don't have kids here, do we? Any kids here? No? Okay. I'll resort to my normal language. Fuck it. I'm just going to be an atheist and throw your whole career, your whole future, all of that away just because one day you got pissed off. That doesn't happen. What really happened is it took a long way for me to get to the place that I could make that statement. I remember one of my first nights in Seattle. When I moved to Seattle, I caught a one-way flight up here. Left my car and my stuff. I had what would fit in a suitcase. I'm living in one of the hotels on Aurora Avenue. Quality places. Marco Polo, right there after you come off the bridge on the right.
That's a really good place to lose your faith.
I remember waking up one night, hearing somebody screaming. And I'm running through the room trying to figure out who is screaming, what's happened to this person. And I realize it's me screaming. And I realize that the people I'm running from aren't here. The fear that I feel is unfounded. I remember in Seattle waking up one day before I went to work. I don't remember the dream exactly. I'm not sure what happened. I jumped up just like that, running through the house, hit a door, just pow, straight on. I was 2 hours late for work that day because I was unconscious on the floor in my apartment. I know what it is to put your back against the wall, your knees against your chest, wrap your arms around your knees and watch and hope to hell you don't fall asleep because you know the torment that's going to happen when you do. The dreams, the intensity, I can't explain that. I can't put into words what happens when PTSD begins to take over your mind and begins to work on you. It's hard to talk about right now. I'm kind of tripping a bit.
So it took about 5 years, I think you said, maybe 4 of therapy with
I've been in
Lynn.
therapy. Yeah, I've been in therapy I started writing. One of the good things, the girl I met on Match.com, she and I were not a good match. She's a great person. She, be wonderful for somebody. If you're looking for a 44-year-old virgin, let me know. I'll hook you up. If that didn't send a red flag up.
Do you see a pattern with him there? Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Don't worry, I broke it.
But the neat thing was she was a shrink, and right off the bat, after she'd known me for a few weeks, she says, I've got a friend that you need to see. And she hooked me up with a shrink who really does a great job dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, most of it military related, but she began to recognize enough wrong with me to know that I needed to get some good help, and got that good help.
And thank God she was an atheist.
Yeah, Lena's an atheist. She was one of the first ones. I remember telling her I was reading Dawkins and Hitchens, and she's like, don't. You're going to limit yourself. You're going to cut yourself off. I told her I'm never dating another Christian woman. She's like, no, don't do that. Try to stay as neutral as you can. I mean, she was doing everything she could to keep me neutral. One day I just finally told her, I said, look, I cannot believe in God. I mean, trying to make me believe in God be like trying to make me believe in Santa Claus. I mean, I have seen through Santa Claus. I figured that out. I got over it. I've seen through religion. I've got it figured out. I hadn't got over it yet, but I know this much. I'm not going back to believe in what I believed before. So, thank you.
Amen.
So at that point, she kind of unveiled and said, yeah, okay, I'm an atheist too. I just really didn't want you to be in a place where I influenced you to go where you are. So she's helped me a lot in that area. But the purpose in saying all of this, I can explain to you pain that is hard to comprehend. I can explain to you the torment of being controlled in every aspect of your life. When I became pastor, I was shocked at the things because I never really realized how much control we gave to the pastor. People would come to me and say, what kind of car should I buy? Like, dude, I drive a 1975 20-year-old Corvette. I mean, if you can do better than that, I mean, on your own, the things that they would ask me, the level of control I had in their house, in their household. And I tried to shun that the best I could, but I know there are men who try to take that because, as I was explaining earlier, the abusive man I served under, he was so controlling in so many areas. Not everybody who comes out of Christianity comes out of it with the experience that I had. A lot of people who come out of Christianity, it may have been more benign, but the truth of the matter is, people aren't leaving the Episcopal Church and becoming atheists because they're comfortable. There's some, yeah. But for the most part, they don't have to believe much. There's not much requirement there. It's the fundamentalist churches that are adding to the atheist community faster than anything else. Some of the studies done by Dr. Darrell Ray, who we associate with, have borne that out. And there have been other studies as well. The people who are leaving Christianity are leaving with needs. I had severe needs. I met Valerie Tirico. I went to a place where Dan Barker was speaking, met Valerie Tirico. And she was the first person who really blew my mind. I had an apartment that someone made meth in, and everything I owned turned into hazardous waste. And I found myself, again, second time in Seattle, living out of a suitcase with clothes I had just bought at Fred Meyer.
Thanks to another Christian woman in
that.
I put my foot down. I said, honey, you are not allowed to date Christian women ever again.
That's right.
Not while I'm around.
That's right. And I kind of realized that was good advice. But there I was, literally with nothing again, and it came up in the conversation. Valerie hadn't seen me in a while. I had met her, and she totally blew the mold, because at this point I still thought atheists are supposed to be evil because it takes God to be good, right? So if we're evil, then we should be evil. Now, I'm not really good at the evil thing. I don't know if you've noticed. I never was, even when I was a Christian.
I always tell him, honey, you were way too moral to have ever been a pastor. That's why it didn't stick.
It did not stick. So Valerie asked me, we were having coffee up on Capitol Hill at Vivace, and Valerie's asked some questions, and she said, so what are you doing? I said, I don't really know. She said, well, what do you have? I said, nothing. She said, you have a place to stay? I said, yeah, I got an apartment. She says, but I mean, what do you need? I said, I have some clothes. She said, do you have a bed? No. Do you have a table? No. You need everything. Yeah. She took me through her house. She had a blow-up mattress. She had, a table and a chair. I didn't have to sit on the floor to put my socks on. It may not mean a lot to you, but here's this person who in my mind is supposed to be inherently evil and doing things she doesn't have to do at all to help me out, to give me a chance to recover and to get back on my feet. Another guy, and you got to understand my opinion of people that has changed. I was one of those who thought gay people are evil, that they just want to be that way. And, although I did leave a church service one time because this pastor was gay bashing, and I just couldn't take it anymore, because if anything, we shouldn't be rejoicing that people are going to hell. We should be instead trying to do something to help them, instead of just rejoicing over the horrors of what's going to happen to them forever. And a friend of mine at work found out what was going on, and he invited me over to his house. He and his partner had just moved together, and they had 2 of everything. And he took me through his house, giving me a toaster, and giving me that, and giving me this, and even loading in his SUV and bringing it to my house. And I'm like, this isn't working right. Gays are supposed to be evil, atheists are supposed to be evil, and all these Christians are praying for me, and a gay family and an atheist family have got me back on my feet again. And something began to change. But that's what we're trying to do with Living After Faith now. What we're trying to do is build, and we got a few minutes and then we'll take questions, is trying to build community. Because when people come out of church, I was lucky. I started in radio in 1979 when I was still in high school, and became an assistant news director of a radio station, had news background, and have stayed involved in news all the way. So when I came to Seattle with 25 years of radio experience, actually closer to 30, they hired me instantly, and I was able to get a job. Many of the people who come out of that type of situation don't have something to fall back on like that. When you've lost your family, when you've lost your career, when you've lost your home, when you've lost your friends, when you've lost your world, you need a world. You need a community. You need somewhere that you can step into. And that's, I know I sound like I'm preaching right now. Sorry, one day I'll get over that.
Nah.
But what our vision is, and we're just 2 people, but in creating community, this 1 in 4 is a beautiful place. I love the message that gives. As people began to recognize, and I'll use the gay community, as people began to recognize people in the gay community as good people, as people in the gay community began to come out and people say, oh, I know him. He's not a bad person. He's not some evil, horrible person. He's a good guy. As this began to happen, it began to change the public opinion of people. And it also began to make it easier for the next generation of people to come forward and make those same declarations. And it's making the world a better place. I think that as people see through the bullshit of the Bible, and believe me, it's loaded with bullshit. As people begin to see through this Bible that makes no sense at all, this Bible that says if a man rapes a woman, he has to give her dad $50 and take her as a wife.
I think a lot of people recognize the wrongness of that.
As people begin to recognize that none of the scientific facts in the Bible actually, in fact, we can prove them all wrong. As people begin to realize, for the most part, now right now, some people will be skeptical enough and strong enough in that to say, okay, I'll step off into this brave new world all alone without a parachute and see where I land. Most people aren't willing to do that. Most people aren't strong enough to do that. Most people aren't courageous enough to do that.
I don't think it's a conscious choice either. It's just, if you don't know anybody who identifies as an atheist or a non-believer, you don't feel comfortable identifying as that either. Yeah. And I don't want people to think of community as like, oh my God, we have to form churches, or we have to get together in this building, every week and have donuts, although that's fun, don't get me wrong. Even just like, we'll have a couple of people over to our house on like a Sunday or Saturday and we'll all watch a movie together. That's creating community. Going on a forum or an email list or whatever, and just somebody shares something, you say, dude, welcome to the community. That's it. That's all you got to do. You don't have to, there's no overarching like, oh my God, we have to like create some big organized structure. We don't have to be in person even. We just have to just kind of be friends with each other and be open with everybody else about what we are.
In your social networking, let people know you're an atheist.
That was a big step when I finally added atheist to my Facebook profile. I was like, oh boy, am I going to get it.
I did the same thing and had, of course, your routine, people trying to reconvert me, and once they realized they couldn't, then they just write you off as reprobate and leave. And you're kind of glad they left. But seriously, just the fact that someone on your Facebook or your Twitter knows that you're an atheist opens the door for them to look at things. And if they've already looked at things and decided they don't really buy that stuff, but there's nowhere really else for them to go but stay where they are, it begins to let them see that there are alternatives to believing in the sky fairy and believing in things that they really can't believe in anyway. It opens up a door. So that's what we're all about now. We're trying to help facilitate making community that works. You know, when I was in church, I was good. I was a good pastor. They would tell you that, except for that part at the end where he went wacko. But before that, I was a good pastor and took care of a lot of things. There are some things that churches do well, and there are things that really in the atheist community don't happen. You know, when we got married, we couldn't find a atheist officiant to do our wedding. We had to have some guy do a non-denominational wedding that we really didn't like.
He was a Christian too, and he was really nervous.
He was like, I'm not going to do anything weird here. Like, yeah, you don't have to, dude. We're going to have, you know, you're acting like we're going to like have a baby to eat or something, which we are, but at the reception, and you're not invited to that. So.
It was 20 minutes in a bar called The Chapel. That's what our wedding was. It was awesome.
So, you know, right now, if you want to get married, and I can do that for you. I'm now credentialed to do an atheist wedding if that's what you want. You know,
and he still sounds like a preacher.
It does.
Yeah.
Memorial services. I did Case. Everybody knows Paul Case. He and Amber got married, did his wedding. It was beautiful.
Yay.
The bride was gorgeous, and Case was Case. But, congratulate them next time you see them. They're two of the most awesome people. But, you know, when an atheist dies, you know, when a Christian dies, boy, they roll out the stuff. They know how to respond to that. We need to find a way to do that in and among ourselves. Like she said, it doesn't have to be a building, it doesn't have to be organization, but there's still needs that people have in the atheist community, things that churches do well.
Oh, hell, just bring them a casserole. You don't have to be in a church to get a casserole, right?
Right.
I love casseroles.
Bring them a keg of beer or something, you know, just being there. And one of the things that we can do is make ourselves available to one another and be there for companionship, be there for friendship. But there are times that even we as atheists need a shoulder to cry on or someone to lean on or a little bit of help. And people coming out of church especially are going to need that because their world has been taken away from them. And chances are they were like me. They made a choice and did something different and had no idea how severe the consequences really were going to be. I knew I would eventually lose my church because I knew what they believed and I knew how hard it was to change that. I knew I'd lose that. But I felt like I was honor bound to the people to at least show them that the things they believe are wrong and why. I felt honor bound to that. So I made a hard decision. You know, when I went away from the church, I had to make if it's all lies, and I realized in the process, all the upper echelon of that church realized it was all lies. They knew that, but they were at the point that they were riding the gravy train and they weren't about to get off the gravy train even. I couldn't be that person. So it creates this place where there are people that make a simple decision, and like that, I can't ride that gravy train, I got to change something. And I knew it would cost everything, but I didn't know what everything really was. I didn't expect it would destroy my family. I didn't expect that my wife of 20 years would leave the moment I was no longer attached to the ministry. I didn't know that I would lose the relationship with my daughter. She got married this past summer, and I was allowed to attend the wedding, but I was not allowed to participate, not allowed to walk her down the aisle. And
it was in a Pentecostal church, complete with a shaming sermon. Oh, it was very uncomfortable to watch.
I've never really used the word whoremonger much, and never used it at a wedding at all, but it was on the big screen.
You believe this guy put up a frickin'...
the wedding's a whole other story, but
yeah. Wow.
The point I'm trying to make, and I'll close with this and let you ask questions if you want to, is there are people just like yourself who made a rational decision.
Or an irrational one. Or an irrational one.
Or irrational when you really figure it out. That they can't play that game anymore. And when they do, they need a place to land. They need people who will care about them, people who will love them, people who will be people who will invite them over and watch a movie. They need a community to be a part of. And that's what we're all about, is asking and trying to create and trying to be a part of that community. Does anyone have questions?
One of the things I've come to learn is that community, in order to have established community, you have to meet consistently, and you have to have financial support. By the way, I encourage everybody to donate to the Seattle Atheists up there. The other thing, I'm wondering, you obviously have a gift for expressing yourself.
Preaching.
Have you considered perhaps having a Sunday meeting every Sunday morning? Preaching about rational thought? Why not have a cathedral of rational thought?
You know, I like this question. Let me restate the question for the people listening on the podcast. He asked the question, have I considered having a Sunday meeting where we do have rational thought and teaching and that kind of thing? I have considered that. And let me kind of go back a bit and come forward to where I am now. When I first became an atheist, in fact, I fronted Dan Barker out on this. When Dan Barker was at UW, he had this thing where, we all got together, some people made some announcements, we took up some money, Dan Barker gets up and preaches a sermon, and then at the end of it there was altar call, which is him signing books and getting money for that. And I asked him point blank, I said, what's the difference in what you're doing here than what you did 20 years ago? He looked me in the eye and said, we didn't sing a song. It's the truth. And at that point, I was of the attitude that if you don't believe anything, you don't need anything. If we're atheists, we don't need a new church. And at that point, I was of the opinion, in fact, that if we, as atheists, get too organized, 500 years from now, we'll just be another denomination. We'll just be another religion. I've changed on that, and here's why. I realized the pain that I came through coming out of Christianity. I realized how devastating that was to me. I chose to live standing on the edge of the Aurora Bridge. I had reached a point where I just could not face life anymore as a human being whose life had been destroyed. And I walked out to the bridge and was standing on the edge of the bridge, and same palm trio, although this one I think was a 680, it was the newer one. I just flipped it and looked at it, and there was a picture of my daughter. And I could hear in my ears, verbally, I could hear the words at my funeral, people looking at her and saying, now, Joy Beth, if you ever leave the church, this is what will happen to you. You know the great Christian man your dad was, but when he left the church, he's in hell now. And when he left the church, he did that for whatever reason, but whatever his reason, it wasn't good enough for him to end up here. And this will be what happens to you. And I would be the cause of her never having a door to leave. I've never tried to make her leave, but I will be damned if I'll be the reason she can't. So in that moment, I walked off the bridge, and I remember thinking, if I can't die, then it's time for me to learn how to live. And I made a decision that changed my life. That's a hard place to be to make that decision. And that's the place that a lot of people get to when they're coming out of Christianity. So they're going to need help. They're going to need. So back to the question here. Have I considered it? I've thought about the possibilities. It can't look too much like a church because that's too frightening for people who've come through that. And I got that experience. I preached a few. I spoke. a few weeks ago at a UU church over in Kirkland, and it just freaked me out. It was way too churchy, even though UUs really aren't that churchy. It was...
We had a song about evolution.
Yeah, it was great. It was, all you would expect an atheist service to be. But yes, I agree. I think that there does need to be more activity, more things. I think that, we have our every other month thing is Seattle Atheists. And I would encourage you, if you feel like you need, more stuff, start something. Anybody can go on to meetup.com and start a meetup. If there are some great meetups, and you know what? We don't have to be exclusive and say I'm part of this one and not part of it. You can pick and choose and go to everything you want to. If you want a family-friendly meetup where you get together, start something. And yes, at some point, I probably will start a recovering religionist group because we're affiliated with recoveringreligionist.com. We thought there was a group forming here, and I haven't heard anything back from that. If it doesn't, I will do that. But as far as a church-type environment, I just it can't be very churchy. Yes.
It's just a community center.
A community center.
I thought about that. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Part of the thing, and I was...
she said, what if it's just a community center for those who can't hear? Yeah.
Repeating the question. And that would work. Or even in your homes. I was the pioneer in the United Pentecostal Church of home fellowship group churches. I started, these home groups that, worked with the church and everything. There's a lot to be said for that type of community. But you have to flip your mind and say it's not outreach, it's not, it's community. And I think that there are a lot of things that we can do. Community center works, non-threatening environments. Some of the things we do, we have meetups at bars. I think that there need to be some things that are not bar-centric, that are community center-centric, or at someone's home, or at a park, things of that nature. And I do think that those things, there's certainly an open door for that.
And I'd also argue that, every little thing that we do can be kind of an outreach and a community building thing. I mean, the podcast, Living After Faith, we tell people's personal stories. And that's, how is that different from you and me sitting and talking, and I tell you what happened to me, and you tell me where you came from? That's what we're doing. Somebody blogs about their experiences, about why they don't believe, or what their life is like as an atheist. Every single little thing we do, or, standing out at Westlake with a sign saying the end is not nigh when Harold Camping makes another failed prediction. And somebody just walking by just sees, oh, that guy's got a thing that says he's an atheist. Huh. All of that. No effort is wasted. No effort is bad. Nobody's being a jerk. There's all different flavors of ways people talk and what they do and share. I think that's a big part of this. And, just having a couple people over, watch a movie like we do. That's creating a community. It's not a home church group, but no. Thank goodness.
But it is community, and we do have discussions. One of the things we did recently was we watched The Ledge. If you haven't seen it, it's great. It's
available on Amazon. Streaming.
Yeah. And we watched The Ledge and then discussed it afterwards, which was pretty good. Any other questions?
Strategically, how would you relate to family members, loved ones? You mentioned your daughter. And I'm sure a lot of people in this room, like myself, have people who really genuinely believe I'm headed to hell the moment I die. If ever they find out that I don't go to church anymore, that they will drop everything in their lives to make me do that. And they do it, I believe they really do it out of love because it's really what they believe in. How do you talk to them and what's your advice?
The question is, he's asking about when your family is full of believers and you are not. And they give you a lot of you're going straight to hell, they're terribly worried about you, they have a hard time interacting with you because they just can't imagine, what's going to happen to you. They're terribly fearful. And how do you interact with them? How do you deal with that? And my thought is there's really no easy answer. But
there's not an easy answer. I would say do exactly the opposite of whatever I did wrong because I was not able to keep that relationship. And I'm sorry, I wish I could say, here's a step-by-step process. The bottom line is, and you're very right, they're not evil people. They really earnestly think that your soul is going to be tormented forever and ever. And think about it from their perspective for a moment. If you really thought that someone you love was going to be tormented eternally in flames and pain and torment and torture and all that horrible stuff, wouldn't you do anything you could to help them, to rescue them, to keep that from happening? I mean, even if it came at great cost to you?
So you can repeat this if you'd like, but what I've done with my family in general is just try to keep in touch. I know a lot of situations they'll cut off touch just completely, but if you try to keep in touch and you send them, I don't know, a Christmas letter every year, or you tell them what you're doing and how it's benefiting the community in general, then it's harder to say you're going to hell. It's harder to say you're doing this. I don't come from a crazy Christian family, but I do come from a mildly religious family. And I think that just keeping in touch and making an effort constantly, if they let you, is the way it's the only way that you can break down walls, is to let them know that you're an atheist and you're still functioning.
I like that answer very well. Basically what he said is stay in communication, let them know, let them see your life, let them see how you're doing, and keep the doors open. And by all means, if you can, I would recommend that. One of the things David Silverman recommended is the way you come out is let them, take them into consideration when you make the change and become an atheist, or when you make it public that you're an atheist, and do it in a way that's allows you to explain why you're making your decisions, what decisions you've made, why you believe differently, and then move on to other subjects and try to keep the lines of communication open. But I can be honest with you, there are some people of faith, and you love them to death. I mean, my daughter still cries herself to sleep praying that Daddy will get saved again, and I can't change that. There's nothing I can do. And I understand your question. I certainly, it's one of those things we all have to work with. Bob.
The question is, how much time per week do we put in for the Living After Faith podcast?
It depends on who we talk to and how much editing is involved. This one, we're going to have an hour and a half because I'm going to throw it up straight out the way it is. But
Maybe
a lot of
two-parter.
Yeah, a lot of the interviews we do, though, we may talk to someone an hour and a half, and only about a half an hour of that's where we really want to go. So we have to carefully edit that to keep it into the time frame of what we do. On average, I would say I probably put in 5 to 10 hours a week, which doesn't sound like that much, but it's pretty intense, focused on little bitty bits and bytes of audio. So 5 to 10 hours a week is pretty much standard for what we do. But then again, we have a short podcast. But ours is edited. A lot of people don't edit. They just open up the mics and talk. And for that, what little show prep you need, and that's pretty much all you would need. Yes, sir.
So addressing the gentleman that was talking about family, I have a cousin who's I don't have a very close family, but I have a cousin who's born. And he made some inroads of wanting to become closer, has invited me down to California every weekend for some time. I finally wrote back to him and said, really, your Republicans and your Christians really, like, if you lived in Magnolia, I know we have here. I also find that for myself, and this may be judgmental, but it's what Christina kind of addresses this in talking about. When you come out as an atheist, it's different than coming out as gay, because you're saying that they're wrong. And there's no getting around it. There's no getting around the fact that you believe that they're wrong. And there's also no getting around the fact that they think you're going to hell, which I find extremely offensive.
The statement he made is that in dealing with family members, he has one family member who's trying to reach out to him and probably expressly for evangelism purposes. And how do you deal with that situation? And he mentioned Greta Christina in her comment, coming out as atheist is different than coming out as gay. When you come out as gay, you're just making a statement about yourself. When you come out as atheist, you actually make a statement about religion. You're saying you believe they're wrong. And that's not inherently true in coming out as gay. So it is a little bit different. You are a little bit on the edge. One of the things Valerie Tirico and I talked about is what really determines what family is. Is it a few notches on your DNA strand, or is it the community and how much people care about one another and interact with one another? And sometimes you just have to replace family with people who don't share the same little notches on the DNA train. And I think that there's some validity in that, in saying that there are people here that I feel closer to than some members of my family. And
same for me, and my family's not fundies.
And that doesn't negate the fact that you care about those people who are family members, but that relationship does sometimes have to change, because it's just, that's the hardest thing you deal with, is trying to make peace in a family when something as central as religion comes between you. At some point you've got to realize, wow, they're never going to give up on the fact that they think I'm going to hell, and I'm never going to give up on the fact that they believe in a sky fair. Yes?
I just want to comment, because I think I disagree a little bit with the idea that as an atheist, you by definition think that they're wrong. I think, you might, but I think the point is more that you don't think they're right, which is a subtle distinction, but I think that it's real, and I think it's softer, and can be a lot easier to follow, because I'm perhaps in an unusual situation that I'm very happily married to a Christian, and I think that that touch of agnosticism is actually very helpful, and that, while I do think he's wrong, I don't think he's wrong in an arrogant way, and that makes a world of difference. Just the fact that I acknowledge that I believe what I believe, but I could be wrong, and a lot of both him and Christian friends that we have as well, actually, because I go to church with my husband sometimes, and we actually have Christian friends who consider me a Christian because I go to church, even though I will say that I don't believe there's a God. And the reason is they realize, and obviously we're not a fundamentalist church, but they recognize that, hey, I doubt all the time too. We really aren't different. And I think that that's true. I think that they're, stepping away obviously from the fundamentalist Christian, there isn't a huge difference. And that's one thing I think, trying to be more visible is really helpful for those people to recognize that, hey, there's not a huge difference here. And I think one key part of that can be the message of, I don't believe that you're right as being a different statement, and I believe you're wrong.
Very good. And she was sharing her experience with being married to a Christian, going to church with him sometimes, and that the Christians around her don't consider her to be not a Christian because she goes to church, and she's sharing that that bit of doubt, that bit of agnosticism that I think pretty much we all have, is what can kind of disarm those people from like, oh my God, you're wrong. No, oh my God, you're wrong. That we all just kind of acknowledge that we don't really know all the answers.
Gentlemen, yes.
I just wanted to make a comment. I have respect for you guys coming here and talking to us, being so open in your time. I guess I'm lucky. My family's not disowning me or anything for it. Some of them are kind of agnostic. I think I'm a little off going into this, but whatever. This guy's with his family, and he's married to a guy that's goes to church, and you guys. I just never imagined that people went through this kind of drama. So, just wanted to say thank you and have respect for everything you guys are going through to come here and say who you are, and what you believe, and just really respect.
Thank you. On that note, actually, we got our first Jesus mail. All the members of Seattle Atheists.
All the members of Seattle. Yeah, someone hold one of those up.
Oh, Jerry, show us. It's anonymous mail sent to, everybody who's listed on the website for Seattle Atheists.
It says, Jesus Christ
to all
loves
of you, Jesus Christ loves you. Yeah, thought that was kind of cute.
I bet they think that really.
That's a great idea. Yeah, being public about atheism sometimes is not easy, but Yeah, you really can't talk about it at some workplaces. And you know, we've gotten, there's been the death threat here and there. Just a couple before we headed to Texas last time, or time before last.
Over here. If we don't have any more questions, I think we've got some refreshments over here. We need to be out of the building at 4, is that right? Or do we have 4:30? Okay. 4:30. Yes. Well, feel free to meander around, get to know somebody, and make some community happen.
Thank you for listening to the Living After Faith podcast with Rich and Deanna Joy Lyons. Living After Faith is a podcast designed to help you as you leave religion and move forward with your life. We are the official podcast of RecoveringReligionists.com, a recovery group founded by Dr. Darrell Ray, the author of The God Virus. The music for this show is provided by Morrison's Prophecy. See LivingAfterFaith.com for a link to more music from Morrison's Prophecy. We welcome your feedback, and you can find phone numbers and email addresses at LivingAfterFaith.com, at Facebook.com/LivingAfterFaith, and follow us on Twitter at LAF with me.